Hi, I'm Brent Scott, and you're watching the Blitz C&E channel. Today's video, I'm going to be talking about what's the ideal lobe separation angle for your small block Chevy and LS engine. So this video is a bit long. I've broken it up into several sections. The first part of this video that I'm going to start off with is I'm going to talk about lobe separation angle, what it is and how it affects the engine's performance. The section after that, I'm going to show you dyno testing results that I've done with different lobe separation angles, which will lead into the section after that. I'm actually going to give you recommendations for lobe separation angles on your small block Chevy for street strip use. In the section after that, I'm going to talk about the LS platform. What are some ideal lobe separation angles to target on those engines when you're using them for street strip use? Section after that, I'm going to talk briefly about power adders and the relationship of lobe separation angle on those, particularly superchargers and turbos. And then the last section of the video, I'm going to go into detail about, since most of you guys that subscribe to this channel are TPI guys, you know that I have a TPI engine. I'm going to give you full cam specs on those, not just a lobe separation angle. Whether you're running an intake like mine, which is kind of like the TPS mini ram, or you're running the traditional longer runner intake. So I'll give you full specs on those, on what would be ideal for street strip use and to get the maximum performance that you can out of that particular intake system. Before I go too much further in this video, I want to throw a disclaimer out there about this video, okay? This information is based on my personal experience and testing, all right? It's not the end-all, be-all of performance. This is not the holy gospel of hot rodding. So if you don't use my information, you're not going to go to hot rodding hell over it. And also, I'm just going to, even though I'm giving you recommendations, I'm just going to throw my data out there, and you guys can totally decide whether it's right for you or not. I'm not going to say I'm right and someone else is wrong. Because look, I can only test so many scenarios, right? It's virtually impossible to test every engine combination, okay? So it's okay to disagree with this, and that's why I'm not going to even state this as fact. I'm just going to share my data and my opinion with you. Whether you agree with it or not, that's up to you. So one other thing I need to clarify in this video is I want to give you my interpretation of what I believe is a street strip engine, because that's very important. Street strip engine to me is you're running a full exhaust system with mufflers, okay? It's not a perfectly tuned race exhaust with zero back pressure. Second, you're running an engine that has either 9-to-1 through 11-to-1 compression. You're running on pump gas. Third, you're running an intake that is an OEM style intake or an aftermarket intake that's designed like an OEM but with better performance. It's not a perfectly built fabricated sheet metal intake with perfect runner lengths and totally optimized and balanced. Again, these specs that I share with you, they may work for some all-out racing applications, but chances are if you're running higher compression, higher RPMs, and you have perfectly tuned exhaust, perfectly harmonized intake system, you're probably going to be certainly a couple points higher than what these lobe separation angles that I'm giving you as recommendations. So moving forward, the next part of this video, I'm going to go into it and we're going to talk about lobe separation angle and what it is and how it affects your engine. What is lobe separation angle and how does it affect the performance in your engine? So I don't want to oversimplify this because camshafts are complicated, but I know there's a lot of different viewers that have different levels of knowledge, so I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. So lobe separation angle has to do with the distance in between the intake centerline lobe and the exhaust centerline lobe. It's measured in degrees. What does this affect? Well, it affects overlap. What is overlap? Overlap is the point at where the exhaust valve is just starting to close at the end of its cycle and the intake valve is just starting to open at the beginning of its cycle. And it has to do when both the intake valve and exhaust valve are open at the same time. That's overlap. What are you trying to take advantage of overlap is? What you're trying to do is take advantage of the exhaust pressure wave or pulse wave. When the exhaust leaves the cylinder itself, it creates a vacuum or a low pressure in the cylinder. By opening up the intake valve, it allows the intake air fuel charge to come in there quicker. It's kind of like a supercharged or boosted effect. Now, I say that lightly boosted. It's not like it's 20 pounds of boost, but there's an advantage to it. And some people call this the exhaust scavenging effect. So how does it affect the performance of the engine? Well, I'll step back a little bit because the cam industry will explain this in two different ways. When you're adding in more overlap or lobe separation angle, they break it down to two different things. They'll often call a tight lobe separation angle and a wide lobe separation angle. And what they're saying is if you go after a wider lobe separation angle, which has more overlap, you're putting an emphasis on improving the torque curve, which it does. And if you go with a wider lobe separation angle, that means you're wanting to improve more of the top end power, maybe gain a little bit more horsepower. But the other advantage is to wide lobe separation angle, because you have less overlap, is you have a better idle and you have better street manners. So part of this video, what I'm trying to show you guys is that you shouldn't necessarily think about whether you should run a wide lobe separation or tight lobe separation angle. What you want to do is run the right lobe separation angle. Because if you stay tuned to this, we go into the dyno results. When you target the right lobe separation angle for your engine, it not only improves torque, but it also improves your horsepower. When you dial this in right, it has an effect all the way through the curve, not just one aspect, top or the bottom of the curve. Torque or horsepower. It's not necessarily a trade-off. It affects both. Now you may be saying, well, why does the cam industry explain it this way? Well, one or two reasons. So let's just say, for example, an LS stuff, you often see most cams spec'd out on a 112 lobe separation angle, and that's kind of considered a wide lobe separation angle. So what that does is the reason why they kind of do this is because they know most people will pick too big of a cam, and it's kind of a band-aid effect. If you put a wider lobe separation angle on and you go too big of a cam, you'll still maintain idle quality and streetability manners, so you can still operate your power brakes. But if you pick too tight of a lobe separation angle and then you put too much duration to it, you're not going to have good idle quality and you may not be able to operate your vacuum brakes. But I tell you, there is an advantage to getting this right, because my personal opinion, when I dial in a cam, the first thing I do, the baseline is I start off with what lobe separation angle I need. Then I figure out how much lift I need to put into that cam. And then I target my duration, all right? And I figure out where I want my peak power to be made. But I also, most of the stuff I deal with the street trip, so I make sure that I don't put too much duration in there, that I don't lose my vacuum and my idle quality, because I want to run vacuum brakes. So it's important that when you do this, because there is a downside to having too tight of a lobe separation angle and you put in too much duration, you're going to suffer and not have a vehicle that has street manners. Now, you may be saying, well, how did I come up with this formula? I didn't discover this. This is something that, whether you like the guy or not, David Vizar, he's been talking about this for like the last 30 or 35 years in his publications. I'll put a link below into his YouTube video, and he goes to his 128 formula. He talks more into details of it, and he does a way better job at explaining it technically than I do, okay? But that's not the point of this video. I'm trying to make this a simple video that everybody can understand, no matter what level you are at. So also, he has a link in there. He has a custom cam calculation program that he offers. I think you can buy it or you can rent it. Definitely is worth checking out, because the cool thing about this cam calculation program, it'll not only tell you what duration you need to be running at, what lobe separation angle to run at, but it'll also give you a target of what type of vacuum you can expect to be running with that cam. So if you can still operate power brakes. Kind of really cool thing that I've never seen anybody offer such a thing. So I would check that out if you're looking to build your own custom cam. Definitely help you out. One other guy you should check out that goes into some great detail on lobe separation angle and the exhaust pressure wave and how it affects it is check out Cattle Dog Garage and Racing. There's a link below, and he has some great explanations and diagrams of showing, especially the overlap cycle and how the events happen how they play a role. And it's another good explanation on why it's important to get the right lobe separation angle from your engine. So hopefully you stay tuned to the next part of this video where we start going over the dyno curve, and you'll really understand why I have a big emphasis on starting with the lobe separation angle when I select my cams. All right, hopefully you saw the cam specs on both these. As you can see, they're virtually both the same cam, with the exception of the blue line cam is on a 114 LSA, and your red line cam is on a 109 LSA. So let's look at the peak torque. The 114 LSA cam is making 431 foot-pounds of torque, and your 109 LSA cam is making 439 foot-pounds of torque. So obviously the 109 LSA cam is making more torque, which is to be expected for a tighter lobe separation angle. Through the curve up to the higher end into the peak horsepower. So take a look here. The 109 lobe separation angle cam is actually making 431 horsepower, and the 114 lobe separation angle cam is actually making 425 horsepower. See, this is where the contradiction of belief of how lobe separation angle affects the performance of the engine. As you can see, what I was trying to explain earlier in the video, you're not only making more torque when you're on the right lobe separation angle, but you're also improving horsepower. That lobe separation angle, when you're dialed in properly, it affects the whole power curve. So let's roll back a little bit. The only actually time, if you look, where the 114 LSA cam actually comes close to making the same power is right around 5,000 to 5,300, briefly there. But never once does it actually make more power. It only just comes close. And then obviously as we go down the power curve, especially down to 3,000, you can really see the advantage when you're dialed into the closer lobe separation angle, especially the 109. Look at 3,000. We're right around there. We're making about 17 more foot-pounds of torque at the lower RPM range. And that kind of carries that trend until it starts narrowing up to the peak power. So, if you just look at the peak numbers, you may not see as much, but if you look at through the whole power scale, you can see where when you dial in the lobe separation angle to the ideal one, you're making more power all the way through. So let me show you another dyno test I did with a 107 lobe separation angle next. Okay, here's the dyno results with the 107 LSA cam in there. So you saw the specs. It's not 100% identical to the other cams, but it's within a degree or so. Close enough. See, I already knew at this point that this engine needed to be on a 108 lobe separation angle. But just to validate and confirm my thoughts, I decided to run this 107 LSA cam. So the 107 LSA cam is the black line. Now, if you notice right around 2700, you really start to see where it starts making more torque than the other two camshafts. And it continues that trend all the way up to peak torque between the 109 and the 107. Obviously the 107 is still making a bit more torque, and the 114 LSA cam, it still blows that away. Now as we get closer upstairs to peak horsepower, notice how the 109 LSA cam is making more horsepower, where the 107 starts to fall off. Now that's what will happen when you start going too tight with your lobe separation angle, and that's probably where the industry comes up with the belief or the saying that, tighter lobe separation angle promotes only low end torque, and where a wide lobe separation angle is where, for higher horsepower, broader power curve. But hopefully what you're starting to see here is that when you get yourself dialed in to plus or minus 1 degree of the right lobe separation angle, that it not only makes the power torque, but it also improves on horsepower. So one thing before I move on and show you the 108 lobe separation angle cam, that this is something the dyno really can't tell you, especially a water brake dyno, because you typically pull them in, start at 2,500 or so, give or take, depending on what type of cam you're running. They can't pull off idle. But as in the car, when you have an engine that's ideal, you got good heads, good compression, good exhaust, and you're on the right lobe separation angle, one thing I've noticed is the tip-in throttle is much more responsive. And even off of cruise, when you accelerate, the engine will jump sooner into the power curve. The closest thing I can explain to you, because I'm a road racer guy and I've done a lot of two-stroke stuff, when you really have the lobe separation angle dialed in, it has a similar effect of how a two-stroke pulls into its power curve. It almost has that explosive bang to it. That's kind of the closest way I can explain it, but that's not something that the dyno will be able to tell you, or you can see on the chart here. So let's move forward and take a look at the 108 lobe separation angle cam. Okay, this is the dyno results with the 108 lobe separation angle cam. It is the black line. So you saw the specs. Now this cam is not the same as our 114 LSA cam and our 109 cam. So the thing about this test was I wasn't out to prove this theory. I knew the theory had worked, but what I was doing was I was developing a cam that would pair with my LS3 heads that would be a street-friendly cam that would work with an OEM stock converter. So, and the LS3 head definitely likes to have a larger split on the exhaust side of the duration. I'm not going to go into details on why. That's kind of a video of itself, but that is why this cam is not identical to the others. But it's close enough to where I can show you by the example if you follow through with the rest of this video. So let's take a look at lowering the curve. So lowering the curve, you can see the 108 lobe separation angle comes in and it makes more power than the 109 on the torque curve to about 3,000. But as you notice, it'll start to fall off here at peak torque. And that is partly due because we're running more of an exhaust split. And that's typically what happens when you run a longer duration on the exhaust side, you bleed off your torque. But what we lost here, we picked up at the top end. We are making more horsepower on the 108. We're making 436 horsepower. And if you go to the 114, you can see we're at 425. So we're about 11 horsepower up on that. And even on the 109, we're making about 5 more horsepower. So you can see the advantage. Now, if you were to ask me if I put this on the same exhaust duration, the 4 split as what the others have, your horsepower would go down on the 108, but I don't think it would be by much. I still believe you'd probably be about 8 to 9 horsepower greater than the 114, and your peak torque would be over your 109, and you'd be making probably about 5 more foot-pounds. So you might be around 444 foot-pounds of torque. But as you can see, on the 108 and the 109, as you get close, the advantages are there. And hopefully there's enough here that you can understand why, at least for myself, why I believe it's important to start speccing your cam with the right lobe separation angle, then dialing in your lift and dialing in your duration. So the rest of this video, I'm going to go into more specifics. I'll give you lobe separation angles to target on small block Chevy and LS configurations of different displacements.